Please, come on, ladies and gentlemen. To God be the glory, great things He has done. So loved the gifted, He gave us His Son, who yielded the burden, the atonement for sin, and opened the light gate that all may go in. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory. Great things He has done. Oh, perfect redemption, oh, purchase of blood, to every believer, the promise of God, the vilest offender who truly believes, that moment from Jesus a pardon receives. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory. Great things He has done. Great things He has done. Great things He has done. And great are rejoicing through Jesus the Son. But purer and higher and greater will be our wonder, our transfer when Jesus we see. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the earth hear His voice. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. Let the people rejoice. Oh, come through Jesus the Son, and give Him the glory. Great things He has done. Thank you. May be seated. Our next song is, to be honest, I just learned this song today, but I think you know this song. Who knows? The song is 245, is more about Jesus. Aww. Okay. Let's sing the song. And just one more secret. That's his favorite song. More about more gaze to others show, more of craving for the sea, more of His love who died for me.
Now, babes. All right, thank you very much. I was wondering why you was asking me what my favorite song was. You had a good lunch? Hopefully it wasn't too good. You know, when I was in South Africa, I learned about the ocular gastric muscle. You know, when the stomach goes out, the eyelids come down. So I'm going to try and keep you awake this afternoon. And how we're going to do that is we're going to try as much as possible to keep this interactive. So please feel free to ask any questions, raise your hand if you have pearls of wisdom to give. We are going to pool our collective wisdom this afternoon. So we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. The PDFs from the PowerPoint will be available. I will send them to Priya, and Priya will distribute them to whosoever wants a copy. Okay? So feel free to take any notes that you want, but you can get a copy of the PowerPoints. Right, so are you feeling energetic? Good, please stand. Just like last night, I'm going to put some statements up on the screen. If you agree with the statement, remain standing. If you disagree with the statement, sit down. No discussion, no clarification, just make a decision. Is that okay? So if you agree, you're going to do what? Remain standing. If you disagree, sit down. Right, first one. There is no such thing as a sinful emotion. There is no such thing as a sinful emotion. If you agree, remain standing. If you disagree, sit down. There is no such thing as a sinful emotion. So if you believe that there are such things as sinful emotions, then you need to sit down. If you don't believe there are sinful emotions, remain standing. Okay. If you believe there is, you sit. Okay, everybody up. Next one. We as Christians, we should be free from emotional extremes. We shouldn't exhibit emotions in the extreme. Huh? If you agree with the statement, remain standing. All right, everybody up again. Everybody standing? Strong emotions should be expressed rather than repressed. Strong emotions should be expressed rather than repressed. I no clarifications. Okay, why am I hearing so much discussion? All right, everybody up again. Women experience emotions more than men do. You can lie sideways if you want. Women experience emotions more than men do. All right, everybody up again. All right. We should keep our problems to ourselves. We should keep our problems to ourselves. Agree, remain standing. Disagree, sit down. You lot are so talkative. What is that? Everybody up again, please. I think this is the last one. Only prayer can remove negative emotions. Only prayer can remove negative emotions. Okay, you can be seated. Now, in the space of just 6 statements, you can see that there are possible disagreements in how we should handle emotions. Now, just like last night, I have to hold my hands up and admit that those statements were a bit unfair, because you could always answer them with, well, it depends. But we're going to work our way through the program, and hopefully we will answer all of the queries that we have just raised. So, emotional intelligence. Healthy relationships depend on how we deal with our emotions. Now, we naturally generate emotions. In practically every interaction that we have with another human being, we generate emotions. Have you ever met somebody who looks like somebody that you don't like? Have you ever had that experience? And that, even that will generate some level of emotions that you need to acknowledge and work your way through. So in our relationships, we always generate emotions. So let's begin by defining our terms. What are emotions? In fact, let me do it this way. If I ask you to give me a word, if I say emotions, what word comes to mind? Feelings, okay. What else? Again? Happy, okay, which is an emotion, but in terms of defining what emotions are, feelings, expression, okay, that's involved. Again? Drama. Oh, the drama. Oh, the drama. Yeah, drama. Any others? What are emotions? Thoughts. Oh, yeah, we're going to come back to that. Result of thoughts. Okay, yeah, we're gonna tease that out as we go through. Making sense out of a situation. Remember, we're trying to define what an emotion is. So what is an emotion? It's a reaction. Okay, yeah. I think all of the above are applicable. Let me give you a chemical reaction. Okay, emotions do involve chemical reactions. I'm not sure we're going to deal with that in this program, but yeah. Let me give you a definition. It's not definitive, but it's a definition. The part of the consciousness that involves feeling, desires, impulses, often accompanied by physiological changes. So let's take the last part of that sentence. Can you tell me, how do our emotions affect us physically? Give me examples of how emotions impact our physicality. Again? Palpitate. Your heart, yes. Heartbeat. Blood pressure can go through the roof, up and down. Sweating. Any other examples? Sickness. Yeah, nausea. Again? In English, please. What did you say? What was the word you used?
I don't know. You said in English. So.
Okay. So yes, crying is another example. Any others? Palpitations, yeah. Anxiety, which expresses itself how physically? Yeah. We're going to come back to that. So we realize, we know, and especially us as Adventists, that there is a very close connection between our emotions and our physical well-being. What affects one affects the other, and vice versa. Yeah? I think Ellen White makes a statement like that they work in sympathy with one another. So, what are the purposes of emotions? Now, God could have created us without emotion, but He didn't. So, why did He create us with emotions? What purpose or purposes do they serve? Expression, okay, good. And in terms of expression, sometimes, you end of a service, you listen to a sermon and individual goes up and says, That was a wonderful sermon that the pastor just preached. And you know, it's kind of incongruent because there's no emotion that goes along with the statement. So emotions help us to express ourselves. Good. What else was there? Interaction. Yeah. What else? Interpretation. Do you want to unpack that?
Depending on the person's expression, you can interpret. It could be wrong or right, but you can interpret what they're trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, somebody says they've just come through a relationship breakup, and they say, I don't care what he thinks about me. And the words are incongruent with the emotions that are being shown. So yeah, your emotions help us to interpret what is actually, the meaning of what is actually being said. So yeah.
Filter or release.
Filter or release. Yeah, absolutely. Our emotions allow us to get rid of pent-up chemicals in our body. Anybody? What else? Purpose of emotions. Communication. Yeah. To make life beautiful. I love that. Yeah. To make life beautiful. If you took emotions out of the equation, you know, those of you who are married, what was your proposal like? You know, on the basis of economic projections and, you know, you take out the emotions, you take out the beauty in life. So yeah, okay, let's have a look. They enhance our understanding of God. How do our emotions enhance our understanding of God? Do they? Do you accept that? How? Better able to interpret his word, the Bible. Yeah, the word should have an emotional impact on us as well as an intellectual impact. We are created in God's image. So God is an emotional God. Our understanding of our own emotions can help us gain an insight into who God is. So when God says in Jeremiah that my soul shall weep in secret places for your pride, we can relate to that because we know what it means to weep. So they help us to understand God. They help us to understand ourselves and others, improve effective communication and development of social skills, aid decision making. And as we will see later on, our emotions should not lead the decision making process, but they are an important source of information for decision making. Provide motivation, you know, it's right there in the word, emotion. Our emotions are designed to guide us in a particular direction. They allow us to experience beauty and pleasure. They warn us about impending danger. You know, sometimes you can get a sense that something's not right. Kind of a warning signs. So these are some of the purposes of emotions. Now, we are created for connection. The Bible says that it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. So this is telling us that before sin, there was something that was not good. And what was that? Loneliness or aloneness. Now, aloneness, have you ever been felt alone in a crowd? You can be surrounded by thousands of people and yet feel very alone. You can be sitting in church, surrounded by brothers and sisters in Christ, and yet feel very alone. Because aloneness is not an issue of the rational mind. So if it's not an issue of the rational mind, what is it an issue of? Why do people feel lonely? It's an issue of our feelings, but what's missing? Lack of love, lack of relationship, lack of connection. It's heart connection. So this idea of aloneness has to do with our emotional state more than our intellectual state. So, the effect of the fall on Adam and Eve. How did the fall affect Adam and Eve's emotions? What was the impact of their sin on their emotional state? They experienced guilt, they experienced shame, pain, what else? Sorrow, fear. All emotions that we were never designed to experience. It was never God's intention that we experience these emotions. So the experience of sin profoundly impacted Adam and Eve's perceptions, their emotions, their ability to relate to one another. God comes looking for Adam, and Adam replies, I heard your voice in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. So their sin changes their relational dynamic. The God whom they fully trusted beforehand was now a God whom they feared. And Ellen White makes this comment about the fact that while, as a result of their sin, their understanding of who God was changed. Had God changed? Same today, yesterday, and forever. But they now perceived him as a God to be feared as opposed to a God to be loved. And our understanding of who God is impacts the way we serve him. That's why if you have people in the church who are ungraceful and unforgiving and judgmental, it is probably because they serve a God who is unforgiving, ungraceful. Can feelings lie? Think about it before you answer. Are you sure? Let me put a couple of scriptures on the screen. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So Jeremiah is talking about the heart in its sinful state. Is capable of leading us down the path of deception. Solomon says there is a way that seems right, or a way that feels right, but its end is the way of death. So there is the possibility that our feelings can be involved in deception. But in reality, it is not so much our feelings that deceive us, it is the interpretation we place upon our feelings that leads to deception. How we understand our feelings. All right, here's a book, highly recommend it, by a guy called Dr. Timothy Jennings. Timothy Jennings is an Adventist psychiatrist. And he wanted to understand how the mind works. So while he was studying psychiatry, he made himself a promise that for every hour he studied psychiatry, he would study the Bible for 2 hours. He wanted to make sure that his understanding of how the mind works was in line with both the Bible and also Ellen White's writings. And he came up with what he calls the hierarchy of the mind. And here's the hierarchy. He says at the top of the hierarchy is what we call the spiritual nature, which is made up of reason. What is reason? What is reason? Give me a bit more than that. Well, what capacity do we have that animals don't? The capacity to rationalize, to think, to evaluate. That's what reason is. Then there is our conscience. What is the conscience, or what does the conscience allow us to do? be aware of our own existence. Yeah, self-awareness is a component of that. But what do they allow us to do essentially? Yeah, they are an important facet of our choice, but before that, what do they allow us to do? Think is part of the process, but it's not what I'm looking for. To choose between right and wrong. Our conscience is our moral compass that allows us to discern between right and wrong. That's why when Paul talks about having our conscience seared as with a hot iron, he's talking about an individual who no longer has the capacity to discern between right and wrong. That's when you commit the unpardonable sin, when you are no longer flexible, or you cannot no longer perceive the workings of the Holy Spirit. So our conscience allows us to discern between what is right and what is wrong. And the way that you keep your conscience healthy and fully functioning is by continually making these discerning choices between what is right and what is wrong. The last part is worship, our worship of God. And worship simply refers to what we give our hearts and we give our minds to. So that makes up the spiritual nature. The next level is the will, which is, said it before, choice. It's our power of choice. Ellen White talks about everything depends upon the right functioning of the will, our power of choice. Then there are our thoughts. And in our thoughts, that's everything that goes through our mind. So our beliefs, our values, our morals, our imagination. The imagination, by the way, is a very powerful faculty. Ellen White made a statement one time where she said she was talking to a lady who kept saying, I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get sick. I'm going to get sick. And Ellen White said to her, if you keep saying you're going to get sick, you're going to get sick. Because what we convince our mind of, our body will sympathize. Have you ever seen one of those stage hypnotists? You know, they bring people up on the stage and they hypnotize them and they get them to do all these crazy things. There was a stage hypnotist, brought these folks up on the screen, hypnotized this guy and gave him a piece of chalk. And he held the chalk between his fingers as if this chalk was a cigarette. And he convinced him that he was smoking a cigarette. And he convinced him that the cigarette was burning down, and it's burning down, and it's burning down. It's going to burn your fingers. It's going to burn your fingers. It's burning your fingers. And he dropped the chalk. The hypnotist then took a bandage and bandaged up his fingers. Do you know, a couple of days later, he developed calluses on his fingers where he held the chalk. That's the power of the imagination, because his mind was so convinced that he had experienced a burn that it did all the mechanism necessary to send out all those healing enzymes and thingy-bobs, whatever they're called, red blood cells. And that's the power of the imagination. So, what the mind can conceive and believe, we can achieve through God's grace. And that works both positively and negatively in terms of what we believe. Then there are the feelings. Impulses, desires, affections. Now, God wants us to be making our decisions up here. The enemy wants us to be making our decisions. Now, if you think about it, think about the worst decisions you've ever made in your life. You got it? Were those decisions made after a period of fasting and prayer? Were they made after a period or a pros and cons exercise? You got a piece of paper, you put all the cons on one side and all the pros on the other side, and then made your decision? Were they made after you consulted with wise counselors? Or were they made on the basis of your feelings? Feelings were never designed to lead our decision-making process. And yet that's what the enemy wants. We can have as much intellectual knowledge as you can have. You know, I mentioned that I work with couples in crisis counseling. And do you think, when I sit these couples down, if I was to ask them, what do you think is necessary in order to have a healthy relationship, that they'd be able to tell me? Do you think? Have they ever heard of sacrifice? Kindness? Intellectually, they know. The crux is, can they do it on an emotional level? I mean, it's like, if I was to ask you, what is necessary in order to live a healthy lifestyle? Could you tell me? Do you? So there's a difference between what we know intellectually and what we live out in our experience. And oftentimes, what makes the difference is how we handle our emotions. You know, when a temptation is that strong, you know, hello. When a temptation is that strong, how do you handle the emotions that go along with that temptation? So in good decision making, feelings should always be subordinate to reason and conscience. So let me relate it back to the getting married kind of idea. You can have somebody who ticks all the boxes. But if the emotional component is not there, then that might not be the best decision for you to make, especially for somebody who you're going to wake up next to. So there needs to be a marrying of both the intellectual and also the emotional side of our relationships. Left brain, right brain integration is crucial. Yeah, we won't go into all that. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. That embraces every aspect of our humanity. And so too, our relationships with each other should embrace every aspect of our humanity, our spirituality, our emotions, our physicality, and also our intellect. If we neglect any aspect of our humanity, we cannot have fulfilling relationships. So we cannot develop spiritual maturity without emotional maturity. This diagram used to be in a different format. I used to have them all in just one line, but my understanding has developed to the extent that emotions, intellectual, and physicality are all ways of expressing spirituality. Different ways of expressing spirituality. If we neglect any one, there's going to be a problem. Now, when you think about it, in terms of us as a church, what do we have to intentionally develop ourselves spiritually? What programs do we have? Sabbath school? What else? Prayer. Well, let's put that under prayer meeting. What else? What programs do we have? Huh? Bible studies, divine service, AYS programs, health and temperance. Yeah. Well, that can come under the physical. Let's go with the physical. We have health and temperance programs that we have, CHIP program, New Start. What do we have to develop ourselves intellectually? Said one of them already. Ellen White says that one of the best ways to develop the brain is through the study of God's Word. What do we have to intentionally develop ourselves emotionally? Not a lot. We don't, but in terms of church programming, we don't tend to focus on developing emotions, and yet emotions play such a major role in how we do relationships. This was a cover of Time magazine, 1992, just at the beginning of the whole explosion of emotional intelligence, which happened in the business world, which is a bit of a shame because, for me, it's right there in the Word. It's right there in Ellen White's writings. And yet it took somebody who operating in the business world to bring emotional intelligence to the fore. And he said the emotional intelligence may be the best predictor of success in redefining what it means to be smart. Somebody said it this way. They said, your IQ, intelligence quotient, will get you hired. Your EQ, emotional intelligence, will get you promoted. So you can be, let me put it this way. If you're doing a job that involves working with people, you need emotional intelligence. And it's amazing to me how so many people who work with people lack emotional intelligence. Why are you going to go into a job that requires you to work with people if you don't like people? Why are you going to get a job as a teacher if you don't like children? And yet some do. So, what is emotional intelligence? Number one, you can recognize your emotions. And apparently there is one gender that is better at it than another. Now, I put up on the screen in the beginning that women experience emotions more than men do. And some of you are very vociferous and say, no. What do you think? Is there a difference in the way men and women relate to emotions? So unpack that for me. So do women experience more emotions than men do? 100% more, you think?
So we both express differently, but of course we both express. But I think mainly because of hormones, women would express much more.
I'm not arguing with you on that one.
I think we both experience sort of similar emotions, but it's how we express it and when we express it.
I think I think in the beginning we said that God is an emotional because we're made after his image. And in order to understand God, we have to express emotion. The emotions help us to understand God. So in that light, women understand God better because they have more emotions.
Ooh. Ooh. Anybody want to challenge that?
Because of the same feminine emotions, that's why the fruit was so accessible to Eve originally. Yeah, very accessible.
So you're saying if Eve knew how to handle her emotions better? Oh, okay.
I think we all express, but it's more about how we are nurtured. Well, men are they are nurtured to be strong and don't show emotions, and women are you have to be soft and kind, and that's why they show their emotions because of how we are nurtured, but everyone shows emotions. It depends on how they are nurtured.
When I was growing up, my father sat myself and my two brothers down in a room. And he gave us a lesson in emotional intelligence. He said to us, he'd experienced some difficulty back home, and it really hurt him. And he said to us, never tell anyone how you feel, because they will only use it against you. Here endeth the lesson. Now, he didn't say that last bit, but that's what he said to us. So, as men, we tend to be socialized to suppress emotion. You know, if women cry and express emotions, that is socially acceptable. But for a man to do that, you know, it's like come on, man up. You know. So socialization leads men to suppress emotion. One of the things I came across in my studies is that men and women both experience depression. But women are diagnosed much more with depression than men are. And one of the reasons why is that the tools used to diagnose depression are biased towards women. Because men tend to exhibit depression in different ways than women do. A woman is more likely to go to her doctor and more willing to talk about her problems and get emotional when she talks about them. Men don't tend to do that. They ain't going to the doctor to talk about their problems. Men tend to exhibit depression in different ways. For example, high-risk behavior, driving fast, overworking, alcoholism. Huh? What was that? Overeating. I never heard that one, but yeah, that may be a way. Addictions, are a way of exhibiting depression. The addictions are a symptom of a problem rather than the problem itself. So there is a guy called Archibald Hart who actually came up with a tool to diagnose male depression. So while women are diagnosed with depression more than men are, the suspicion is that incidences of male depression are much higher than the statistics actually say. So while we express, as you so rightly said, we express our emotions in different ways, we all experience our emotions. All right, so you can recognize and identify your emotions. You can manage your feelings. I might be a rageaholic, and I might recognize that. But unless I know how to manage my rage, the knowledge that I'm a rageaholic is no good to me. So I've got to be able to manage it. Thirdly, you are sensitive to other people's emotions. Do you know people who are not? Say what I want, when I want, how I want. Just telling the truth. But the Bible says, speaking the truth, how? In love. So just the truth by itself is not enough. You got to be motivated by love when you speak the truth. And then you can manage your relationships effectively. If I know that if I say certain things in a certain way, it's going to impact you in a negative way, then I can decide to say it in a different way. So that's the essence of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence involves self-awareness. And what is self-awareness? What is self-awareness? I recognize my feelings, I know what makes myself tick. It's an ongoing awareness to our internal states, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. Self-awareness. Self-regulation is what I was saying before. It's about managing our emotions, and that relates to how we experience emotions ourselves, the blue. The red has to do with how we relate to other people. So empathy. What is empathy? Feeling with the person. Okay, excellent. So feeling for the person is more sympathy. Empathy is that you can relate to the emotions that they are experiencing. The Native Americans had this saying, or the Native Indians had this saying, do not judge a man until you have walked 2 moons in his moccasins. So that's empathy. Social skills. And that has to do with how we deal with each other in light of the emotions that we generate between each other. So here's the good news. Emotional intelligence is learned rather than inherited and can be improved throughout life. In fact, that's part of the sanctification process. Your IQ is pretty much what it is. You know, I can study until I'm blue in the face. I will never be an Albert Einstein. That's what the good Lord has given me. But emotional intelligence, you just develop that more and more and more and more and more and more and more. So, here are the influences on emotional intelligence. Genetic makeup. Can I do anything about my genetic makeup? No. Which is significant in terms of the current discussions around gender identity and gender fluidity and all of that. But you can't change your genetic makeup. It is what it is. Childhood experiences. Can you change anything about your childhood experiences? Take time. Calm down. What can you change about your childhood experiences? Again?
Okay, so the impact that might have for your later experience as an adult, you can change that.
Impact. There was another. How can you change? Okay. Obviously, you can't change what happened. But what you can change is your perception or your understanding of what happened. Now, I've mentioned my father a few times. He wasn't the most pleasant of individuals. He was a violently abusive person. So when I was growing up, I believed as a child that he was violently abusive because I was a bad child. I mean, why else would your father treat you that way? But as I grew into an adult, I understood that the issue wasn't me, the issue was him. So while I can't go back and change what he did, I can change my understanding and my perception of why he did it. And it wasn't about me, it was all about him. So, current level of emotional support. Can we do anything about that? Which is not easy. If I asked you, how many people do you have in your life who you feel comfortable telling the secrets of your heart to, trusting that they will treat what you give them as precious? How many people could you identify? I'm not asking you to. If you can you probably cannot identify more than the fingers of one hand. And that's okay. You know, you're not going to have a whole bunch of people who fall into that category. But if you don't have any, you might want to be intentional about increasing your level of emotional support. And be very careful of the mindset that says, you know, I don't need anybody. It's just me and the Lord. Because that's not how he created us. He created us for connection. And if we do not live within the context of healthy, intimate, authentic relationships, we will suffer psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Because that's just the way that we were made. So it's important for us to be intentional about increasing our level of emotional support. And that's not always easy. But it means stepping out of our comfort zone in order to connect with other people. Because while we might think, you know, there's nobody out there, you will never know until you actually step out.
In as much as that's the ideal, I would personally think that could be risky.
Mm-hmm, it is.
You know, so could it be better to seek professional help?
Oh, I'm not talking about issues that require clinical intervention. And even if it is an issue that requires clinical intervention, what the research has shown is that you can go through a brilliant process with a counselor. But if you don't have an emotionally healthy system in order to that will allow you to continue your healing, you will probably relapse. The first thing you said was, isn't that risky? You cannot love without risk. It is impossible to love without risk. Now, why is that? What's the risk? That getting hurt? Because there is no guarantee that when you love, you're going to get love back, or that you won't get something negative coming back. So love, by definition, love requires risk. So when we reach out to try and increase our level of emotional support, absolutely we're taking a risk, but it should be a calculated risk. Because for those of you who weren't here yesterday, we were talking about boundaries. And boundaries require us to make discerning judgments about who we open our hearts to. Because not everybody is worthy of our emotions. So we need to be intentional about increasing our level of support, but do it intelligently. If it's an issue that requires clinical counseling, get clinical help. Nutrition. Can nutrition impact our emotions? Yeah. Give me an example. Lunch. Eating too much lunch. Yeah, eating the wrong combinations of food can cause toxins in your system that make you feel drunk. Alcohol is an example of how what you put into your body can affect your emotions. You know, some people get angry when they drink. Other people get overly friendly. They love everybody. Love in inverted commas. Your nutrition is so important in terms of our emotional well-being. And what tends to happen, if people are feeling low, some people will do what? Eat the worst kind of food that they can find, which gives them a bit of a high, which then develops into a crash. Coffee and sugar. Illness obviously can impact emotions, especially chronic illness. Lack of sleep. This is a biggie. There's research that shows that one of the primary factors in marital breakdown is a lack of sleep. Because when you lack sleep, how many of you wake up cranky? We need adequate amounts of rest in order to function healthily in terms of our emotions. Here are the major influences, the greatest influences on EQ, our beliefs, the way we think about problems, and our self-talk. How many of you talk to yourself? Everybody should have raised their hand, because we all talk to ourselves. Some of us do it audibly. Every one of us does it internally. We have this self-talk that is going on. And it's important that we hear ourselves talking. Because for some people, they may be confronted with a problem, and their immediate response to the problem, their thought process is, oh, why does this always have to happen to me? I'm never going to be able to do this. Oh, I can't. My boy went through a period where everything was, I can't. I said, but you're banned from using the word can't. Because he just got into a mindset of, I can't. Because what we tell ourselves, we convince ourselves of. So we need to notice what we are saying to ourselves and to dispute the negative things that we say to ourselves. But we all talk to ourselves. the way we think about problems. I remember listening to one of our great evangelists preaching, C.D. Brooks, I think it was, and he was preaching about David. I know that how David went out to bring food to his brothers, and he heard Goliath out there, and the Israelites were looking at Goliath, and they said, "Oh, look at him. He is so big. We will never be able to defeat him." And he said, "Well, David looked at Goliath, and he said to him, 'Look at him. He's so big, I can't miss.'" Same situation, different perspective. Two men looked out from prison bars. One saw mud, the other stars. So when we talk to ourselves, we need to realize, what are you actually saying to yourself, and is it true? I mean, when you say, this always happens, really? Does it always happen? So we need to have this ongoing dispute with ourselves to see whether or not what we think is actual reality, because most of the time that it's not. Did you know that we are all storytellers? Every one of us are storytellers. So something happens, and immediately we begin to create a narrative in our head. So imagine I come in here and I say hi to the Biju, and he doesn't respond to me. Now immediately I might start to write a narrative in my head that, well, what's wrong with him? He's a bit sometime-ish. He said hi to me yesterday. How comes he? You see? And then if I take that and begin to run with it, I say, "See that Bijou over there? Yesterday he said hi, and I said hi to him this morning. You know what he did? He just blacked." And I can take that narrative that I've written in my head and run with it. And I put 2 and 2 together and come up with 56. So the narrative that we create in our heads, it is vital that we challenge the narrative and clarify the narrative. So what are the possibilities? I came in, said hi, he didn't respond. What are the possibilities? He didn't hear me. Anything else? He may have been suffering from something you could have helped him with if he'd have only gone to you. Could have been suffering. Huh? He ignored me. Well, he was thinking about a problem. Maybe, he was focused on Sabbath school. And he just... So there could be all kinds of possibilities. The only way I'm going to know is if... Ask him. This morning I said hi to you and you didn't respond. What was that about? And it might be that he just doesn't like me. But even if that's the case, I now have information that I can move on and see whether or not I can do anything to change that. Sis.
Somebody tells you that I believe that I'm in a wrong body. He believes that he's in a wrong body, like.
Will you guide them towards professional help? Are you referring to the transgender thing? Another discussion for another day. Okay, we ain't going there now. So these are the main influences. What's going on in our heads? What's the story that we are telling ourselves? And submit what we are telling ourselves to the spotlight of truth. And that will help us to gain a proper understanding of how our emotions are impacting our thinking. So, people with low EQ are managed by their emotions. Samson, is there any evidence in the Bible that Samson was intellectually intelligent? Think about it. What was the evidence?
He has been judged for 100 years in Israel.
The man was a judge. Think about riddles. There is evidence, some evidence there that he had something up top.
And he calculated how many people he needed to kill.
Yeah. I mean, look at the way he destroyed the crops Who would have thought of that? Yeah. So Samson was an intellectually intelligent individual. He would sit as a magistrate and he would decide cases that would be brought to him. So what was his problem? He was ruled by the desires of his heart. He refused to control his emotions. I mean, how many times does Samson get messed up by what issue? Women. Women. Oh, yeah. You know, like we said last night, we cannot control what happens around us, but we can control what happens in us. So yeah, the issue wasn't, Delilah was just a temptation, but the man had the opportunity to say no. So people with low emotional intelligence tend to be controlled by their emotions. Donald Trump. I know he's an easy target, but yeah. Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump intelligent? Intellectually intelligent. I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump had obviously he had a big hand up when he began, but you cannot be successful in business without having some kind of nous. He was successful and he messed up and go on. He was smart enough to be a president. He's a shrewd operator. But Donald Trump's problem is not his intellect. It is his ability to relate in healthy ways to people. He's a user of people. He's a what? Oh, yeah. How do you know when Donald Trump is lying? Every time he opens his mouth. Anyway, the point that I'm making is that there is not a direct correlation between intellectual intelligence and emotional intelligence. I mean, look at some of the past presidents. Bill Clinton, was he intelligent? Then what was Monica Lewinsky all about? To which he caved in. Yeah, absolutely, it's Delilah. So meta-emotion, how we feel about emotions. Big boys don't cry. Now, we kind of spoke about this earlier in terms of how we socialize children. Okay, let's go to this one. There was some research done. And the research asked which culture is the most emotionally expressive. Actually, but you know, when we say Africans, which Africans are we talking about? You know, there is only one. But actually, the top was not an African nation. So who do you think came number one? Italians. Good. I know. Italians. Came out as the most emotionally expressive. Yeah, mamma mia. Who do you think came bottom? British were down there, but they weren't the bottom. Getting warmer. Somebody said Scandinavians came the lowest, along with one other nation. Huh? No, this is a worldwide. Yeah. So who do you think came bottom along with the Scandinavians? I can't remember. Who do you think? Close? Who? Very close. The Japanese. Japanese came the lowest. So, expression does not, as we've already said, expression of emotion does not mean lack of emotion. Expression, yeah. So I've done quite a few funerals in my time. I've been to funerals where folks have kind of stood by the graveside and yeah, you know where I'm going. And there are other funerals where it's like, "Wah!" And it's like they almost want to throw themselves into the grave. Now, does it mean that the one who is experiencing less grief than the one who is bawling and wailing? No, it's just difference in expression, similar to the male-female thing. Go on. No, I'm not. Different presentation for a different day. I do have a whole presentation on the temperaments. But yeah, that comes into it. And we need to take that into account when we're dealing in church. Have you ever been in church where you've had like a praise and worship going on, and you're being asked to stand up, turn around, clap your hands? One of the things that we need to take into account when we do church is that in our congregation we have every personality type. And church needs to take that into account, because if you are an introvert, off the chart introvert, I don't want to be standing up, I don't want to be turning around, I don't want to be clapping my hands. Leave me, let me worship according to who I am. If folks want to do that, go ahead. Feel free. Enjoy yourself. But let's not impose a way of worshiping upon folks for whom that may not be who they are. Yeah. So we need to take that into account when we're organizing our church services to, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, balance is what we're appealing for. Why did you send me down that road? All right, so is there such a thing as a sinful emotion? Let's just tease this out. So let's go back to our diagram. Now, here's the question. Think about it before you answer. On what level of, have I got a question there? Yeah. At what level on this diagram is sin committed? You didn't even think about that. So, at what level is sin committed? We've got thoughts, we've got will. How many of you say on the level of the feelings? Thoughts, will, spiritual nature. Okay, let's tease this out. So, I'm walking down the street and I come to a jeweler's. And I see this platinum watch in the jeweler's window. And I say to myself, that's a nice watch. I'd like to have that. Have I sinned? No? Okay, so I look in the store and I see a security guard. And I think to myself, you know what? If I grab that watch and run, that guy can't catch me. Have I sinned? All right, let me clarify, or let me ask a clarifying question. Order. Let me ask a clarifying question. What is the difference between sin and temptation? Because quite clearly, if I'm looking at this thing and thinking, boy, I could get that, and I'm being tempted. What is the difference between sin and temptation? Bearing in mind that sin and temptation are different. Temptation is not sin, and we agreed? Yes. Yeah. So, what is the difference between sin and temptation? Sin is the... Is it the action? Shh. So let me clarify what you just said. When you give room for the... Okay, so when you are brewing, are you sinning? We're going to come back to that in the next slide.
He said in Ezekiel that the devil said in his heart, I will ascend, what is it called? I'll be the most high. He had those, he had already sinned by doing that. Jesus Christ told, if any man actually thinks about a woman as much as to lay with her, he has sinned. So I think the thought process of the whole thing said, I think he enjoyed it. He enjoyed the fact that he was going to rob that woman. He thought about the fact that man can't catch.
All right, let me clarify. Enjoyment is not the issue. Because when it comes to temptation, the devil is not going to tempt you with something that's not appealing. You know, if somebody came to me and tried to offer me crack cocaine, that's not an enticement to me. I've never had it. I don't want it. But if he came to me with something else, yeah, that's not yours. All right. If he came to me with something else, he might be much more successful if it's something that I find appealing. When he came to Christ in the wilderness, 6 weeks without food, and so he offers him what? Bread. And was that an enticement to Jesus? Was he tempted? Absolutely, he was tempted. But he didn't sin. So temptation is not sin. So what we're trying to get at is, what is the difference? Going back to... Oh, you can, indeed, please.
My point of view, sorry, it's very simple and basic. Thank you. My point of view, sin is something coming from inside, from my own decision, and could be expressed outside through actions or even thoughts. Temptation, something comes from outside to inside. That's the difference.
Yeah, good try. However, in James, I think it's James 1, he actually talks about temptation that comes from within. So temptation comes from both sources. But you're right in the first bit in what you said. Balaam.
Balaam was told in the vision, do not go with these people because the people they have called you for are blessed. They offered him everything. And then, actually, what is it called? Also told them what God had. The first instruction was, do not go at all. But I think, driven by what was on offer, he went all the way. And he needed, even with the talking dumb ass, he would not listen.
Okay. Let me take this point and then we're going to clarify things with this passage.
No, this morning you were talking about the dissidents and where it's 50-50, and then there's a point where it goes to 60-40. And to me, in my mind, that's when you have a decided heart to take an action. So it's not the action yet, but it's gone from on a scale from 50-50 to 60-40, and that's when the sin happens.
Okay, let me ask you the question once again. See if you shifted. At what level is sin committed? Feelings? Thoughts? Will? All right. If it's the level of the will, because on face value, this seems to be saying thoughts. But if you're saying that sin is committed on the level of the will, at what point is the will exercised in that passage? If a man looks on a woman to lust, David sees Bathsheba, the first sight, has he sinned? But he sinned when he chose to keep looking, to lust. So until the will is exercised, it is temptation. So sin happens at the level of the exercise of the will. Now, why that is so important is that there are people who beat themselves up because they are tempted. The fact that you are tempted simply means that you are human. Jesus himself was tempted, but he didn't give in. So, is there such thing as a bad emotion? Jealousy, good emotion, bad emotion? So, let me give you a scenario. We're at home, myself and my wife are at home, and she gets a phone call from a man who is unidentified. And for the next 2 hours, she is on the phone, sharing her heart in affectionate ways with this strange man. Would it be appropriate for me to be jealous? Steady, steady. Well, yeah, I get the point that you're making. There would be a problem with me if I wasn't jealous. 19th of June, 1994, we made promises to each other. And that conversation is violating the promises. So it would be appropriate for me to be jealous. However, if I decide to get a shotgun and go look for this guy, obviously there's a problem. But I can make different choices. Both of us. But here's the thing. I can have a conversation with my wife. I can communicate to her how her behavior is impacting me, and that would be me utilizing the jealousy in a constructive way. So the problem is not the jealousy. The problem is how I exercise my will having experienced the jealousy. But but this is it. Well, when you allow emotions to take over, you lose your senses. Yeah. Hatred. Can I hate? Can I hate? I can hate sin. Okay. Anger. Is it okay to be angry? Yeah. Be angry. Jesus was angry. He was proper angry when he, turned over the tables. There was one passage in Mark where he says, when with the man with the withered hand, he said he looked round about them with anger because of their attitude towards the healing of the man with the withered hand. So anger is appropriate, but anger is not sin. I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. And jealousy simply means to be intolerant of rivalry. God is jealous for us. Say that again.
I believe anger is there. You have to be angry, but you mustn't spend the whole day angry. Then it's the same.
Yeah, the principle is don't let the sun go down on your wrath. But that's a general principle. Because obviously if the hurt that has been caused is deep, you ain't going to deal with that in a day. That's something that's got to be processed over time. But the principle that comes out of that passage is deal with your anger in as quickly a time as possible. Don't hold on to it. Because when you hold on to anger, who are you hurting the most? You're killing yourself. In fact, there is research that indicates that those people who are prone to anger are at a greater risk of experiencing early death than those who smoke, have high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. If you are prone to anger and anxiety, now is the time to be dealing with it. How? Health message. Yeah. If you need clinical help, get clinical help. If you need to develop your relationship with God, if you need to exercise forgiveness, if you need to exercise reconciliation, do whatever you need to do in order to deal with the anger. There is no one size fits all. It depends on what the issue is. Okay, so here is the conclusion. Emotions have no moral value until they are acted upon by the will. All right, let's round this up with Jesus and emotional intelligence. Shortest passage in all the Bible, John 11 and verse 35, Jesus wept, and yet one of the most profound scriptures in the whole of the Bible. Jesus, God with us, Emmanuel, experienced grief. He wept. And the interesting thing is that when he wept, what was he crying for? Yeah. This is at the death of Lazarus. What was he going to do for Lazarus? So he knew that in a very short time, Lazarus would be alive. He weren't crying for Lazarus. He was crying in sympathy with those who were mourning, but he was crying more so for the disbelief of those who would look on, see the miracle, and still reject. Garden of Gethsemane. And here's a summary of what constitutes emotional intelligence as we round up. What was Jesus' feelings when he entered into the Garden of Gethsemane? What did he say that indicated his feelings? My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. The weight of the sins of the world were pressing down on him, and he felt like he was dying. What did he say that indicated his thoughts? What did he say that indicated his thoughts? Before that? Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Put that in ordinary, everyday language. What was he saying? Can't take it? No. It's too much. Is there any other? I don't want to do this. What was his choice? Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. So his feelings said one thing, feel like I'm dying. His thoughts were in line with his feelings. I don't want to do this. But his choice was in line with his value. And what value informed the choice that he made? Give me one word. The primary value. Love. Love that informed, love that puts other before self, the agape love. And that's essentially what emotional intelligence is. That we make choices that are in line with our values. Proactive people make decisions based on principle and values rather than reacting based on emotions. And the reason why we have so much disputes, the reason why we oftentimes cannot deal with our conflicts is that we are reacting based upon emotions rather than being proactive based upon our values. Stephen Covey said, in each situation there is a stimulus and there is a response. And between stimulus and response is our power of freedom to choose. And our freedom to choose determines whether or not we grow as individuals or whether or not we diminish as individuals. I'll leave you with Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your emotion, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Any questions, observations, pearls of wisdom? Good question. I have no idea, but I look forward to the time that I can come back. That is, it may not be the answer you want, but it is an answer. Repeat. We can help them to understand. If you're in a relationship with somebody and the relationship is important, then it's important to try and help them understand what's going on for you. Because if you don't, then there's going to be no meeting no ways on that particular point. Again, how do you help? I'm not sure I understand the question. Oh, you communicate to them in as open a fashion as possible how the situation is impacting you. No, very good question. There is a book by an author called M. Scott Peck called The Road Less Traveled. Now, before you rush out and buy the book, M. Scott Peck was a humanist who converted to Christianity. He wrote this book, and for me, the first half of the book is brilliant. The second half of the book is not worth the paper it's written on. There's a lot of his humanistic philosophy that's still in the book. But what he had to say about love, I found very informative. And one of the things he said was that in love, we have to be discerning. He talked about the concept of judicial sharing and judicial withholding. let me give you an example to kind of put this in practical terms. My wife came home one day and she said to me, I bought you a cake, but I ate it. And I said to her, why did you tell me that? And she said, because I wanted you to know that I was thinking about you. And I said, well, now I'm thinking about the cake that I could have had. And that kind of launched us into a conversation about, in a relationship, how much should we share? So on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being you don't share anything, but 10 being you share absolutely everything, where ideally should we be? So for me, I said to her, there are things which I've experienced which you don't need to know. Because I don't think sharing them is going to enhance our relationship. In fact, I think sharing them would create barriers in our relationship. And so there are things which I'm probably going to take to the grave. Her thing was, we should strive for the 100%. And I'm not in disagreement with her, because I've kind of shifted in my attitude. I think it's important to strive toward the 100%. But as we strive toward that 100%, we still need to be making discerning choices and ask ourselves, when I share, for whose benefit am I sharing? Am I sharing simply because I want to offload some guilt and then just leave you to deal with the fallout? Or am I sharing because I genuinely believe that in sharing, this is going to enhance our relationship? So we need to make a judgment call as to the impact of what we share. And if we come to a conclusion, an honest conclusion, that it's not going to be healthy for the other person to receive this information, then that's about judicial withholding. And I got all theological on her too. I said, do you remember that time when Jesus said to his disciples, there are things which I could share with you, but you cannot bear them now? Because I thought that was going to end the discussion. And her response was, so you're making me weak. You're saying to me that I'm too weak to handle what you might share with me. And it's like at that point, I just had to kind of hold my hands up and say, but I don't have to answer your question. Half, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, that we are not always equipped to help them. They may need help that, some kind of, well, that's suggesting that clinical help is not biblical, which I don't agree with. You get the help where you need it. God gifts different people with different skills in order to help in different ways. It's kind of like saying, if you break your leg, you're not going to just pray. By all means, pray for me, but take me to the hospital. Okay.
I would like if you could talk more about this, because as a religious community, we might have the mindset that psychology therapies are not as healthy.
Yeah, which was one of my big concerns. When I studied counseling, I was concerned that I would be learning models of therapy that were unbiblical. So it's very important that if you going to access clinical counseling, that you check out what the person is offering. Because if they're offering models of counseling that are contrary to biblical principle, then you don't touch it with a barge pole. So there are certain models of counseling, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think is very biblical. The form of counseling that I studied was breath therapy, solution-focused breath therapy, which again it's very much in line with biblical principle, that you understand what happened in the past, but you don't dwell in the past. You look at what your situation is here, and you build solutions going forward. So check out what the model of counseling is. From a Ellen White perspective, if you look up studying Ellen White's writings, the term psychology, in the vast majority of cases, she speaks about psychology in very negative terms. But she also says, I think it's in the book Education, that true psychology is found in the Word of God. Psychology simply means psyche to do with the mind, logos, ology, study. So studying the mind. I remember reading a book by Mark Finley on persuasion, and he quoted a couple of Ellen White's passages in there where she said, working with the human mind is one of the nicest works that we can do. So we have to be clear that how we operate, how we work with people's minds is in line with biblical principle. What we should never do is throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so, if it's got psychology attached to it, don't touch it with a barge pole. No, let's be discerning. Let's be intelligent. And what does Paul say? Prove all things, believe all things, hold fast to that which is good. So we need to be intelligent in discerning what is in line with biblical principle and what is not. So excellent question. Thank you.
So you stated that we do not have a basis, especially as a church, to developing emotional quotient. Because emotional quotient, you mentioned Christ's example there, his feeling, his thought, and his will, which was bound in love, and we know that God is love. But we know that in the secular society, people also can be rated on their emotional quotient, which they find through other sources. Now, for those who are Christians, those who've participated in the meeting, where or how do they grow their emotional quotient? Because that can be improved. IQ cannot, EQ can be. How does that improve?
Very good question. Let me recommend some excellent reading for you. Along with the PDFs for this presentation, I'll also send a reading list. Let me point you to one of our Adventist doctors called Dr. Neil Nedley. Google him, go on YouTube, check him out, because a lot of what he has to say. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. The Depression Recovery Program, but he also focuses, he's got a book called The Lost Art of Thinking, which deals with emotional intelligence, and it's a good source. The book is not cheap. Let me warn you from now. Your mouth will drop open when you see the price of the book. But you can access his information, as I say, on YouTube. Nedley, Nedley. This is something that we really need to be teaching at the level of the home. We teach good emotional intelligence by modeling emotional intelligence, which means that the work begins with who? Begins with us. And when we become more aware, then we can pass on good, emotionally intelligent principles to our children. That's another presentation that maybe I'll do that on when I come back.
Talking about emotional intelligence, can I book with you some couple sessions?
No, it's a short answer. I don't have the time at the moment, which is unfortunate. I've decided I'm taking on nothing more until I finish my doctorate. I need to get that out of my head, and then I can start thinking about other things. let's have a conversation. Any other questions, observations? Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Until the next time.
That was indeed a brilliant talk on emotional intelligence, and we are emotionally enriched and nourished today. And it was an amazing experience to have you, Pastor Leslie, with us beginning from last night till up until now. So a special thank you to you. And let me put this in an Irish way. Thanks a million from the bottom of our hearts. So in closing, I request we have a song side by side.
Yes, now we are closing the program. Could you please just raise again, like as we started, and let's sing side by side. Side by side we stand, waiting God's command, worshipping the saving King, living by His grace and moving out in faith. Jesus will see us through. Meet me in heaven, we'll join hands together. Meet me by the Savior's side. I meet you in heaven, we'll sing songs together. Brothers and sisters, are we there? Soldiers all are we, go where Jesus leads, to fight the foe and we will overcome. Heaven is our goal, to save every soul. Pray that we all will be there. Meet me in heaven, we'll join hands together. Meet me by the Savior's side. I'll meet you in heaven, we'll sing songs together. Brothers and sisters, I'll be there. Meet me in heaven, we'll join hands together. Meet me by the Savior's side. I'll meet you in heaven, we'll sing songs together. Brothers and sisters, I'll be there. Pray that we all will be
Let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, we thank you for giving us the Christian community, brothers and sisters in you. We pray, dear Lord, that you will help us to enjoy the kind of community that the New Testament church enjoyed, one which is sacrificial, one in which there is fellowship, one in which we work together to finish the Great Commission that you have given to us. I pray your blessing upon this congregation and upon the impact that they have in this community. I pray you help this church to go from strength to strength, to be like that a lamp that is that shines brightly, brighter and brighter until the coming of your Son, Jesus Christ. Keep our hearts bound to each other, we ask, dear Lord. Take us safely to our various destinations and keep us until we come together again. In Jesus' name, amen.